A crumpled $5 bill. That was all it took to dismantle a criminal empire and change the fate of an organization worth $500 million. When Vincenzo the Wolf DeLuca, the ruthless don of the DeLuca crime family, walked into a rundown diner dressed in rags, he was looking for the one thing his blood money couldn't buy: humanity. He didn't expect to find it in Maria, an exhausted waitress barely keeping a roof over her head. But when he tried to tip her his last $5, her response didn't just shock him, it shattered his cynical worldview. Watch closely, because the answer she gave him didn't just earn her a thank you. It made the Mafia boss rewrite his entire will, leaving his ruthless family with nothing but their own reflections. The rain in Brooklyn was relentless, a gray curtain that seemed to wash away the color of the city, leaving only slick pavement and the neon reflection of the Starlight Diner sign flickering in a puddle. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, frying bacon, and damp wool. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the graveyard shift, and Maria Costello was already 3 hours second double shift of the week. Maria wiped a grease stain off the laminate counter, her movements automatic. At 29, she carried the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a frayed scrunchie, and her apron was stained with ketchup from Table 7, a group of drunk college students who had left her a grand total of 27 cents as a tip. She checked her phone surreptitiously, a text from her landlady, Mrs. Goldstein. "Rent is past due, Maria. You have until Friday, or I'm changing the locks." Maria shoved the phone back into her pocket, fighting the sting of tears. She had $42 in her bank account. Her daughter Sophia needed new asthma medication, which cost $48. The math never worked. It never did. "Maria, stop daydreaming and wipe down booth 5, shouted Frank, the diner's manager, a man whose primary management style was volume and intimidation. "On it, Frank," Maria said, her voice steady despite the bone-deep fatigue. As she moved toward booth 5, the bell above the door chimed. A gust of cold wind blew in, carrying with it a figure that made the few patrons in the diner visibly stiffen and look away. He was an old man, hunched over, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He wore an oversized, stained army jacket that looked like it had been pulled from a dumpster behind a thrift store. His gray beard was matted and unkempt, and he wore a beanie pulled low over his eyes. He shuffled in, dripping water onto the checkerboard floor, leaving muddy footprints. Frank was there in a second, blocking the man's path with his considerable bulk. Whoa, hold it right there, Pops. This isn't a homeless shelter. Restrooms are for paying customers only. You understand? Customers who pay." The old man looked up. His eyes, a piercing shade of steel gray, were the only sharp thing about him. "I intend to pay," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel scraping against concrete. "Just a coffee and maybe some soup, something warm." "Let me see your money first," Frank sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm not running a charity here." The diner went silent. The couple in booth 3 whispered to each other, the woman pulling her purse closer. The trucker at the counter turned away, suddenly very interested in his pie. The old man's shaking hand went into his pocket slowly. He pulled out a crumpled wad of singles and some loose change. He counted it out on his weathered palm, his fingers trembling. 3.40 cents. "Coffee is $2, soup is $4.50. You can't afford it. Get out before you bring down the whole atmosphere," Frank said, pointing at the door aggressively. "You're scaring the paying customers." "Frank, stop." Maria's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She stepped between her manager and the old man, her protective instinct flaring despite her own desperate circumstances. "Maria, don't start with me tonight," Frank warned, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. "I'm not in the mood for your bleeding heart routine." "He's hungry and it's pouring rain," Maria said firmly, her spine straightening despite her exhaustion. She looked at the old man closely. He looked frail, shivering from the cold that had seeped into his bones. He reminded her of her own grandfather before he passed, alone in a nursing home where nobody visited, forgotten by the family he'd built. "I'll pay for his soup." "Put it on my tab, Frank." Frank rolled his eyes dramatically, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "Fine, but if he causes any kind of scene or smells up my diner, it's coming out of your paycheck, and you're personally cleaning that entire booth with bleach. Deal?" "Deal," Maria said without hesitation. She turned to the man and offered a gentle smile. The first genuine one the diner had seen all night, maybe all week. "Hi, I'm Maria. Ignore him. He's got a bark worse than his bite. Come on, take the booth by the radiator. It'll help you dry off and warm up." The old man looked at her for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail, every line of exhaustion and kindness. "Thank you, miss," he murmured, his voice softening. He didn't shuffle to the booth. He walked with a strange, deliberate slowness, each step measured and calculated. What Maria didn't know, what nobody in that diner knew, was that under the grime and the rags was a suit tailored on Savile Row in London. The homeless man was Vincenzo De Luca, the Don of the De Luca crime family, a man whose criminal empire controlled everything from the Brooklyn docks to the Diamond District in Manhattan. His organization was worth over $500 million in legitimate businesses alone, not counting the underground operations that generated another $200 million annually. And he wasn't just hungry. He was hunting for something far more valuable than money. A soul worth saving. Vincenzo sat in the booth, the warmth of the radiator seeping into his fabricated arthritis and manufactured frailty. He watched Maria move through the diner with the efficiency of someone who had perfected the dance of survival. He had spent the last 52 years watching people, mostly vipers in boardrooms and soldiers in his organization who would sell their mothers for a promotion, or his own children, Antonio and Gabriella, who circled his fortune like sharks that had caught the scent of blood in the water. 3 weeks ago, his doctor had given him the news in that clinical, emotionless way doctors deliver death sentences. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Maybe 6 months if the experimental treatment worked. Maybe 3 months if it didn't. When he told his children over dinner at his estate, Gabriella had asked about the succession plan before she even asked about his prognosis or how he was feeling. Antonio had immediately excused himself to call the family attorneys to ensure the offshore trust funds were secure and couldn't be touched by probate. That night, sitting alone in his study with a glass of 50-year-old scotch, Vincenzo had realized a terrifying truth that shook him to his core. He was going to die. And his legacy, everything he had built from nothing, would be used to fuel the vanity and cruelty of 2 people he didn't even like, let alone love or respect. He needed an heir, but not one of blood. He needed one of heart, someone who understood that power without compassion was just tyranny. So he devised the test. Over the past 2 weeks, he had visited 7 high-end restaurants in Manhattan, 4 exclusive hotels, and 2 private social clubs, all while disguised as a homeless beggar. He had been thrown out of every single one, sometimes gently, often violently. Security guards had manhandled him. Managers had threatened to call the police. One restaurant owner had actually called the police, and Vincenzo had been detained for 2 hours before his consigliere could quietly make it go away. Maria set a steaming mug of coffee and a generous bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of him, the steam rising and fogging his vision for a moment. She also placed a basket of warm bread rolls on the table, the butter already melting on top. "I didn't order the bread," Vincenzo said gruffly, staying in character, maintaining the facade. "I can't pay for it. I told you what I have." "It's on the house," Maria winked, her tired eyes crinkling at the corners. "Cook made too many for the dinner rush. Better you eat them than they go stale or end up in the trash. Please enjoy them." It was a lie. Vincenzo knew the brutal economics of businesses like this, had owned 3 diners himself in his younger days. Every roll was counted, every item tracked for food cost percentages. She was giving him her own staff meal, the one thing employees were entitled to during their grueling shifts. "Why are you doing this?" Vincenzo asked, his voice low and probing, genuinely curious. Maria paused, the coffee pot still in her hand, steam rising from the spout. She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Dark circles under her eyes told stories of sleepless nights. Her shoes were worn down at the heels, duct tape holding the sole of the left one together. A small bandage covered a burn on her forearm from earlier in the shift. "Doing what?" she asked, genuinely confused by the question. "Treating a bum like he's somebody important," Vincenzo challenged her, pushing to see how deep her kindness went. "Look at me. I'm nobody. I smell like the streets. I can't do anything for you. I can't get you a better job. I can't tip you properly. I'm just another mouth you're feeding out of your own pocket." Maria sighed, a deep, soul-weary sound. She looked out the window at the rain hammering against the glass, creating rivers that ran down to the street. "You know my daughter Sophia? She's 9 years old. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. Last week, she asked me why bad things happen to good people. She asked me why her friend's dad lost his job, why Mrs. Chen down the hall got evicted, why there are people sleeping on the subway." Vincenzo waited, his steel-gray eyes fixed on her face, watching every micro-expression. "And what did you tell her?" he asked quietly. "I told her that the world isn't bad. It's just busy," Maria said softly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Everyone is running so fast, trying to survive, trying to make rent, trying to keep food on the table, that they forget to look down. They forget to look around. They forget that the person sitting on the curb, the person asking for help, is just a person. Someone's father, someone's son, someone who used to be a kid with dreams just like Sophia." She looked directly at him, and in that moment, Vincenzo felt truly seen for the first time in decades. "You aren't a bum, sir. You're a human being who is cold and hungry and deserves basic dignity. If I can't fix the whole broken world for Sophia, if I can't explain why life is so unfair, the least I can do is fix a bowl of soup for you. At least that's something real, something I can actually do." Vincenzo felt a lump form in his throat, a sensation he hadn't felt since his wife Lucia died 18 years ago in a hospital bed, holding his hand and begging him to be a better man. He took a sip of the soup to hide the emotion threatening to break through his carefully constructed facade, the warmth spreading through his chest and temporarily easing the constant ache. "You're a fool," he grumbled, maintaining the act, testing her further. "Kindness gets you killed in this city. Someone will take advantage of you." "Maybe," Maria shrugged, picking up her tray to attend to other tables. "But indifference kills you slower. It kills your soul piece by piece until there's nothing left but an empty shell going through the motions." She went back to work, and Vincenzo ate in silence, observing everything with the trained eye of a man who had built an empire by reading people. He watched a businessman in an expensive suit at another table snap his fingers at Maria like she was a dog, demanding immediate service. Maria didn't flinch, didn't show irritation. She smiled warmly and refilled his water, even though he hadn't said thank you once. He watched Frank berate Maria loudly for a mixed-up order that wasn't even her fault, an error the line cook had clearly made by putting cheese on a burger that was supposed to be plain. She took the blame without hesitation, apologizing profusely to save the cook from getting written up or fired. She wasn't just kind. She was resilient, strategic, and selfless, in a way that reminded Vincenzo of the soldiers who had taken bullets for him, who had valued loyalty and family over their own lives. When Vincenzo finished his meal, savoring every spoonful because it had been given with genuine care, he reached into the hidden inner pocket of his jacket. He had a thick stack of $100 bills there, emergency money he always carried out of old habits from dangerous times. But he didn't touch them. The test wasn't over. This was the critical moment, the moment that would determine everything. He pulled out a single $5 bill. It was crisp, oddly clean and new, contrasting sharply with his filthy, rain-soaked rags. He placed it carefully on the table, positioning it where Maria would see it immediately when she came to clear his dishes. He waved her over with a slight gesture of his weathered hand. "I'm heading out now," Vincenzo said, standing up slowly, leaning heavily on his cane for effect, his body language suggesting deep fatigue. "The soup was good, very good. Warmed me up inside and out." "I'm so glad," Maria said warmly, genuinely pleased. She approached the table to begin clearing the dishes. She looked down and saw the $5 bill lying there, crisp and deliberate. Her eyes widened in surprise and immediate concern. She reached out and picked it up carefully, as if it were something precious. "Sir, you left this," she said, extending her hand to return it to him, the bill held between her fingers. "It's a tip," Vincenzo said stubbornly, his voice carrying an edge of wounded pride. "For the excellent service and kindness." Maria looked at the bill for a long moment, then down at Vincenzo's shoes. They were ancient canvas sneakers, completely soaked through, water still seeping out with each small movement. There was a visible hole in the left toe, and his socks, thin, cheap things, were soaked through. He was shaking slightly, not just from age but from the damp cold that had settled deep into his bones during his walk through the rain. She took his weathered, calloused hand in both of hers. Her hands were warm despite the long shift, rough from years of hard labor, carrying heavy trays, scrubbing floors, washing endless dishes, but her touch was incredibly gentle, almost reverent. She pressed the $5 bill back into his palm firmly, folding his fingers around it with care. "I can't take this," she said, her voice unwavering and certain. "I have my pride, girl," Vincenzo snapped, his gray eyes flashing with manufactured anger, testing her resolve one final time. "Don't insult me with your pity. I'm offering you money I earned honestly. Take it." "It's not pity," Maria said, her voice softening but remaining firm. And then she said the words that would change history, that would alter the course of a criminal empire and rewrite the fate of everyone connected to the DeLuca family. She looked him directly in the eye, stripping away all pretense, seeing past the homeless disguise and the waitress uniform, connecting soul to soul in a moment of pure human recognition. "Sir, money is just a tool for survival, not a measure of worth or dignity. You keep this not because you're poor, but because today you are the guest and I am the host. And in my house, in the space I can control, guests don't pay for kindness. Kindness is free. It's the one thing that should always be free." She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Use this $5 to buy dry socks, please. For me, if not for yourself. I can't sleep tonight knowing your feet are freezing in this weather. I can't carry that image. So please, take care of yourself." Vincenzo DeLuca froze completely. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows violently, but inside his mind everything went absolutely still. "In my house, guests don't pay for kindness." The words echoed in his head, bouncing around, finding cracks in the armor he'd built over decades. He had spent hundreds of millions on power, on politicians, on judges, on territory, on respect bought through fear. He had built monuments to his name in the form of legitimate businesses that would outlast him. He had carved his legacy in blood and concrete across Brooklyn and beyond. Yet here was a woman with a negative net worth, drowning in debt, offering him dignity for free, without knowing who he was, without wanting anything in return. He looked at the $5 bill in his hand, the paper suddenly feeling heavier than any contract he had ever signed, weightier than any oath of loyalty sworn over blood. Then he looked at Maria, really looked at her. The exhaustion etched in every line of her face, the strength in her spine despite everything life had thrown at her, the kindness that somehow survived in a world designed to crush it. "You really mean that, don't you?" he whispered, his voice cracking slightly, losing the rasp and revealing for just a moment the commanding baritone that usually ordered hits and negotiated treaties. "Go." Maria smiled gently, that same warm expression that had greeted him when he entered like a drowned rat. "Get those dry socks. Maybe some hot tea from the bodega on the corner. And please, come back when you're hungry again. The soup is always on me. Always." Vincenzo nodded slowly, unable to speak past the emotion lodged in his throat like a stone. He didn't say goodbye. He couldn't trust his voice. He simply walked out into the rain, clutching the $5 bill tighter than he had ever clutched the first dollar he made selling newspapers as a kid in Little Italy, tighter than the gun that had saved his life a dozen times in the old wars. He walked around the corner into the dark alleyway, where a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows was waiting, engine idling silently like a predator. His driver and bodyguard, a massive man named Sal, who had been with the family for 27 years and had killed 8 men in Vincenzo's service, opened the back door immediately upon seeing him approach. "Mr. DeLuca, how did it go?" Sal asked, concern evident in his gravely voice. "Did they kick you out like the others? You want me to go back and teach them some respect?" Vincenzo shed the wet army jacket, revealing the silk vest underneath, hand-tailored in Milan, the fabric clinging to his thin, cancer-ravaged frame. He climbed into the leather interior, the scent of expensive cigars and aged leather filling his nose, a stark and jarring contrast to the grease and desperation of the diner. "Get me Leonardo Russo on the phone," Vincenzo commanded, his voice returning to the steel authority of a don who had ruled Brooklyn for 3 decades. Now, I don't care what time it is. Boss, it's almost midnight, Sal noted, glancing at the dashboard clock. Leo's probably asleep or with his... I don't care if he's in bed with the Pope himself, Vincenzo interrupted sharply. Wake him up. Tell him to grab the draft of my will from the safe and meet me at the estate within the hour. Tell him to bring his notary seal and 2 witnesses he trusts with his life. We're rewriting the whole damn thing tonight. Everything changes now. Sal's eyes widened in the rearview mirror, shock registering on his usually impassive face, but he knew better than to question the Don when he used that tone. He picked up the encrypted phone and began dialing, speaking in rapid Italian. The De Luca estate sat like a fortress in Bay Ridge, a sprawling mansion protected by 12-foot walls topped with cameras and motion sensors, guards who patrolled the grounds in shifts around the clock, and enough security to protect a head of state. Inside, the air was climate-controlled and scented with expensive sandalwood incense and Cuban cigars. The decor was old-world Italian opulence meets modern power. Marble floors imported from Carrara, crystal chandeliers from Venice, and Renaissance paintings worth millions hanging next to photographs of Vincenzo with 3 mayors, 2 governors, and a president. Gabriella De Luca, Vincenzo's 42-year-old daughter, paced the antique Persian rug in the main sitting room, her Christian Louboutin heels clicking rhythmically like a countdown to war. She was on her iPhone, her voice sharp enough to cut diamond. I don't care about the commission's concerns, Antonio, she snapped into the phone. Father is losing his mind. He's wandering the streets at night dressed like a fucking homeless person. Yesterday, Sal told me he left without his security detail again for the 4th time this month. If the Gambino family finds out the Don is playing dress-up as a vagrant, if the Russians catch wind of this, they'll see weakness. We'll have a war on our hands before we can consolidate our position. On the other end of the line, Antonio De Luca, 4 years her junior, laughed from his penthouse in Miami. He was currently sitting in a private poker game with Colombian cartel representatives, holding a glass of Louis XIII cognac that cost $3,000 a bottle. Let the old man wander, Gabby, Antonio said dismissively. Ideally, he wanders into the wrong neighborhood and nature takes its course. We just need him to hold on for 3 more weeks until the casino deal with the Russians is finalized. Then we can have Dr. Morrison declare him mentally incompetent due to the cancer medication, take power of attorney, and run things the way they should be run, without his outdated sense of honor. He's meeting with Leonardo Russo tonight, Gabriella said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. At midnight. Sal just informed me. He's never called Leo this late unless something major is happening. Antonio's laugh stopped abruptly. Russo, the family attorney? Why is he seeing our consigliere in the middle of the night? What's going on? I don't know, Gabriella hissed, looking out the window at the manicured gardens that cost $30,000 a month to maintain. But I don't like it. I don't like it at all. If he's changing the succession structure or reorganizing the trust arrangements, we need to be ready to challenge it immediately. Get back to New York tonight. Cancel whatever you're doing. This could be bad. I'm on the next flight, Antonio said, suddenly all business. Have our attorneys on standby. If he's doing what I think he's doing, we'll need to move fast. While his children plotted against him from different cities, Vincenzo De Luca sat in his mahogany-paneled private study, wrapped in a silk robe that felt too heavy for his frail, cancer-eaten shoulders. Across from him sat Leonardo Russo, a man with silver hair slicked back perfectly, a face that had seen every dark corner of the De Luca empire, and eyes that missed nothing. Leonardo had been Vincenzo's attorney and consigliere for 31 years. He had structured murders to look like accidents, created shell corporations to launder money, negotiated peace treaties with rival families, and drafted contracts that had started and ended wars. Now he faced his most challenging assignment. You're certain about this, Vincenzo? Leonardo asked, his Mont Blanc fountain pen hovering over the thick legal document spread across the antique desk. This isn't just a revision or an amendment. This is a complete demolition. If you sign this, you are effectively declaring war on your own bloodline from beyond the grave. Antonio and Gabriella will burn Brooklyn to the ground trying to overturn this. Vincenzo coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his entire frame and filled the quiet study. He took a sip of water from a Waterford crystal glass, the same glass he had used to toast Gabriella's wedding 5 years ago. A marriage that had ended in an ugly divorce when she realized her husband loved her money more than her. "They aren't my blood, Leo," Vincenzo said, his voice rough but absolutely determined. "They're parasites wearing my name. I created them. I spoiled them. I indulged every whim. I taught them that power comes from fear, that respect is bought with violence, that value comes from what you can take, not from what you give or build. That was my mistake, and I've lived long enough to see the monster I created." He paused, closing his eyes, and the study fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. "That waitress, Maria," Vincenzo continued, his voice softening. "She had nothing, Leo. Less than nothing. She's drowning in debt. I had Sal run a preliminary check on her finances while I was driving here. Medical bills, student loans from a degree she never finished, back rent. She's one missed paycheck away from homelessness." He opened his eyes, and they burned with a clarity that Leonardo had rarely seen, usually only before major moves that reshaped the underworld. "And she offered me everything she could spare. She gave me her staff meal. She gave back a $5 tip, Leo, $5 that could have bought her daughter's medication or put gas in her car. She gave it back because she didn't want my feet to be cold. She has a sick child who needs asthma medication, and she chose a stranger's comfort over her own daughter's needs in that moment." Vincenzo's hands trembled as he continued. "Do you understand what that means? Antonio spent $175,000 on a car last month, a Maserati he'll drive maybe twice before he gets bored and buys another toy. He didn't even look at the dealership employee who delivered it, didn't acknowledge him as human. Gabriella dropped $90,000 on jewelry last week. Jewelry, Leo. While families in our own neighborhood can't afford to eat, can't keep the heat on." He slammed his palm on the desk, a flash of the old fire. "I will not leave my empire to monsters. I will not perpetuate this cycle of cruelty and greed. I built this family from nothing, from my father's vegetable cart to this. And I'll be damned if I let it become a monument to everything I learned was wrong." "The commission will have questions," Leonardo warned, his voice measured and professional. "The other families will want explanations. Why you're bypassing your blood children for a complete outsider. Gabriella will claim you were mentally unstable, that the cancer medication affected your judgment, made you paranoid and delusional. She'll hire investigators to destroy this girl, this Maria Costello. They will dig into her past, her debts, her relationships, her family. They will try to prove she manipulated you, seduced you, took advantage of a dying man. They might even try to hurt her physically. That is exactly why you are the consigliere," Vincenzo said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the desk. The envelope was sealed with red wax bearing the De Luca family crest, a wolf's head. "Inside is a complete dossier on Maria. I had our best investigator, the one who handles FBI counter-surveillance, run a full background check over the last 3 hours. She's clean, Leonardo. Completely clean." He tapped the envelope. "No criminal record, not even a parking ticket, no drug use, no questionable associations, no scandal. She's struggling, drowning in the kind of debt that destroys people, but she's clean. She's a fighter who's been knocked down by life repeatedly and keeps getting back up. She's exactly who should inherit power, someone who understands suffering." Vincenzo picked up the pen, a Mont Blanc that had been a gift from a federal judge he owned. His hand trembled from the cancer, from the medication, from age, but his resolve was absolutely steady. "Structure the inheritance as a blind trust," Vincenzo commanded, his voice taking on the tone that had once ordered the executions of 12 men in a single night. Section 12, paragraph 7. "The identity of the beneficiary is to remain completely sealed for 45 days after my death. During those 45 days, Antonio and Gabriella will believe they've won. They'll think the estate defaults to them." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "Let them spend. Let them make promises to the Russians. Let them restructure territories. Let them show the commission and the captains and the soldiers exactly who they are without my shadow protecting them, without my reputation covering their incompetence. Let them reveal their true nature." And then Vincenzo smiled, a grim, predatory expression that had preceded the downfall of judges, politicians, and rival crime bosses. It was the smile of a man who had built an empire through strategic brilliance and was now applying that same ruthless intelligence to its complete transformation. "Then you drop the hammer," he said softly, dangerously. "You reveal that Maria Costello owns everything. The legitimate businesses, the Brooklyn properties, the Miami holdings, the offshore accounts in the Caymans, the shell corporations, every single asset. And you make damn sure the succession is ironclad, protected by clauses they can't break, backed by leverage on every judge and politician we've bought over 3 decades. He paused for effect. "Make it so that any attempt to challenge the will triggers the immediate liquidation of all assets and donation to charity. They get nothing, not a dollar, not a memory, nothing." Vincenzo signed the document with a bold, sweeping signature that had authorized countless operations over the decades. Vincenzo Salvatore De Luca. The ink seemed to glow in the lamplight, final and irrevocable. "It is done," Vincenzo whispered, sinking back into his leather chair, exhaustion washing over him like a wave. For the first time in 52 years, since he had taken control of the family after his father's murder in a restaurant bathroom, he felt something approaching peace. "Now I can finally sleep without wondering what monster will sit in this chair after me. Now I know that something good might actually come from all the blood I've spilled, all the darkness I've created." Leonardo carefully blotted the signature with practiced precision, placed the document in a fireproof safe built into the wall behind a painting of the Italian countryside, and locked it with a combination only he knew. "What do you want me to tell your children when they inevitably ask about tonight's emergency meeting?" "Tell them I was settling some old business with the commission," Vincenzo said, pouring himself a small glass of amaretto, knowing he shouldn't drink with his medication, but not caring anymore. "Tell them their inheritance is secure, and that they should enjoy these final weeks while I'm still here. Let them think they've already won. Let them taste victory so the defeat is that much more devastating." "And what about Maria Costello?" Leonardo asked, gathering his papers. "When do you want her informed of this rather significant change in her circumstances?" "Not until after I'm gone," Vincenzo said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "I don't want her gratitude or her fear or her obligation. I don't want her to know who I am or what I'm giving her until it's too late for her to refuse, so that until the will is executed and the transfer is legally complete and irreversible. She might try to give it back if she knows beforehand." He took a sip of the amaretto, savoring the sweetness. "What I want is for her to continue living her life exactly as she is, being a good person in a world that punishes goodness. And then when I'm dead and buried in the family plot, when it's too late for me to see her reaction, I want you to give her the keys to my kingdom and all the tools she'll need to defend it from my children and from the wolves that will circle." Leonardo stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the ornate handle. "You know, in 31 years, this is the most honorable thing I've ever seen you do, Vincenzo. Your father would be proud. The man he was before the violence consumed him." "My father was a fool who got killed for being soft," Vincenzo said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe I'm becoming a fool too in my old age, or maybe I'm finally becoming wise. I'm not sure which." "There's a difference between being soft and being human," Leonardo said quietly. "You've just remembered that difference. I'll see myself out. Rest, my friend. You've earned it." 3 weeks later, the headline in the New York Post was in bold, screaming font, "The Wolf Dies, Vincenzo De Luca Dead at 76. The city responded with a complicated mixture of relief and uncertainty. Flags didn't fly at half-mast for a crime boss, but the power vacuum his death created sent shockwaves through every level of New York's underworld. The commission called emergency meetings. Rival families began positioning soldiers for potential territory grabs. Politicians he had owned scrambled to destroy evidence and distance themselves. But at the Starlight Diner, the news played on a small, grease-stained television mounted in the corner near the kitchen pass-through, largely ignored by the breakfast rush of regulars and truckers. Maria Costello was balancing 3 plates of pancakes on her left arm, dodging a busboy named Miguel who was rushing a cart of dirty dishes to the kitchen. She caught a brief glimpse of the TV screen during a rare moment of stillness. The photo showed Vincenzo De Luca in his prime, an expensive tuxedo, slicked back hair, a stern, powerful expression that radiated authority and danger. The caption beneath read, "Mafia Don dies of cancer, succession in question." "Crazy, right?" said Tommy, a regular at the counter who came in every morning at 6:30 a.m. for coffee and eggs. Guy controlled half of Brooklyn, had more money than God, politicians in his pocket, and still died just like everyone else. Cancer doesn't care how many people you got working for you. Maria paused, looking at the photo more closely. Something about the eyes, those intense steel gray eyes, struck a chord of recognition deep in her memory. They looked hauntingly familiar, but the connection seemed impossible, absurd. The man on TV was a titan, a criminal emperor who had ruled New York's underworld for decades. The man she remembered was a shivering, kind-hearted homeless soul she had known simply as Vinny, who never gave her a last name, who just wanted soup and conversation. He hadn't come back to the diner in 3 weeks. She had saved a pair of thick wool socks in her locker, along with a warm scarf she'd found at Goodwill for $2, just in case he returned when the weather got colder. "I hope Vinny is okay," she thought, a pang of genuine worry hitting her chest. Maybe he found a shelter. Maybe someone helped him get off the streets. She didn't have time to dwell on it. Her phone buzzed aggressively in her apron pocket. It was the text she had been dreading all week, the one she knew was coming but had prayed wouldn't. From landlady, "Maria, you're short $465 this month. I'm sorry, but I filed the eviction notice this morning. You have 72 hours to vacate. Please leave keys with super." The plate in her hand slipped from her grip. It crashed to the floor, shattering into dozens of ceramic shards and splattering syrup and butter everywhere in a mess that seemed to symbolize her entire life falling apart. "Maria!" Frank screamed from behind the counter, his face turning red with rage. "That's the second plate this month. That's coming out of your paycheck, and you're cleaning it up right now before you do anything else." Maria fell to her knees to pick up the pieces, tears finally breaking through the dam she'd built. The world was crashing down. Her daughter Sophia was at school right now, completely unaware that in 72 hours they would be sleeping in Maria's 1998 Toyota Camry in a grocery store parking lot, trying to figure out which shelter had space, how to keep Sophia safe and in school. She didn't notice the black Mercedes S-Class with heavily tinted windows pull up to the curb outside. She didn't notice the 2 men in expensive dark suits step out, looking completely out of place among the construction workers and nurses. She didn't notice them enter the diner and scan the room with the trained precision of professional security until one of them was standing directly over her. Meanwhile, across the city, at the De Luca estate in Bay Ridge, the mood was closer to a celebration than a funeral. The wake was being held in the grand ballroom, a massive space decorated with white roses that had cost more than Maria made in 6 months. Antonio was already wearing a new Armani suit, accepting condolences from captains and associates that felt more like congratulations on his ascension. Gabriella was directing the catering staff with military precision, ensuring the champagne was Cristal and the caviar was Beluga. She had already contacted 3 interior designers about remodeling the estate to reflect her more modern tastes. "It's a tragedy, truly devastating," Antonio was saying to a weeping elderly aunt, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "But Father would want us to be strong and push forward. The family business doesn't stop for grief. We have responsibilities to everyone who depends on us." As soon as the aunt walked away, dabbing her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, Antonio turned to Gabriella, dropping the sorrowful facade immediately. "Did you talk to Leo?" he asked quietly. "He's in the library," Gabriella said, nodding toward the closed oak doors. "He's been locked in there with the notary and the safe deposit materials for over an hour. He says the official reading of the will is scheduled for 2 p.m. sharp. That's in exactly 8 minutes. Finally, Antonio exhaled, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I've got the Russians expecting $40 million by Monday to finalize the casino partnership. I need immediate access to the offshore accounts, or they're going to think we're backing out, and that could start a very ugly situation." "Relax," Gabriella scoffed, sipping Dom Perignon from a crystal flute. "We're the only heirs. Mother died 12 years ago. He had no siblings who survived past the 80s. Uncle Carmine died in prison. Who else could he possibly leave it to? His driver? Please." At exactly 2 p.m., the family gathered in the library, a somber, masculine room lined with first-edition books in Italian that nobody in the family had ever read, leather-bound volumes that Vincenzo had collected over decades. Leonardo Russo sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking like a man carrying the weight of terrible, explosive knowledge. Antonio sat on the right, Gabriella on the left. Various cousins, distant relatives, and high-ranking family associates filled the remaining seats, all of them trying to look appropriately mournful, while their eyes darted greedily to the thick leather portfolio in front of Leonardo. "Let's proceed, Leo," Antonio said, loosening his tie slightly. "We all know the traditional structure. The estate gets divided according to the percentages father established decades ago. I assume I receive controlling interest as the eldest son, Gabriella gets the legitimate business portfolio, and the cousins receive their customary shares." Leonardo didn't blink. He adjusted his reading glasses with deliberate slowness and opened the portfolio. Vincenzo made extremely significant amendments to his will in the final 3 weeks of his life. He felt that leadership of the De Luca family required a very specific type of character. Gabriella stiffened visibly, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips. "Amendments? What kind of amendments?" He was on heavy medication, Leonardo. Morphine, anti-anxiety drugs. Anything he signed in those final weeks could easily be challenged as signed under mental duress or impaired judgment. "Cut the speculation," Antonio snapped, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "Just read it. How much do we each get, and when can we access the accounts?" Leonardo opened the portfolio to a page marked with a black ribbon. He looked directly at Antonio, his expression completely unreadable. "To my son Antonio," Leonardo read in a clear, measured voice, "I leave my collection of vintage watches, including the Patek Philippe that was a gift from the mayor, and a one-way ticket to a rehabilitation facility of his choice, fully paid for 2 years. I leave no equity in any business entity, no liquid assets, and no real property." The silence in the room was absolute and crushing. It was a vacuum that sucked the air from Antonio's lungs. Several cousins gasped audibly. Someone dropped a glass, crystal shattering on marble. "What?" Antonio whispered, his face draining of all color. "Is this a joke? Leo, tell me this is some kind of test he designed. This can't be real." "To my daughter Gabriella," Leonardo continued, ignoring Antonio's outburst completely, his voice never wavering from its professional monotone. "I leave the portrait of her mother Lucia that hangs in the East Corridor, in hopes that looking at it daily will one day remind her of the compassion, kindness, and selflessness she has so thoroughly lacked throughout her life. I leave no equity in any business entity, no liquid assets, and no real property." Gabriella stood up so violently her chair toppled backward, crashing to the floor with a bang that echoed through the stunned library. "This is absolutely insane. He was out of his mind. The cancer destroyed his brain. We'll contest this. Every lawyer in New York will hear about this travesty. You can't do this, Leonardo. I'll have your license revoked. I'll destroy you." "I haven't finished reading," Leonardo said, his voice rising to command the room, cutting through the chaos with the authority that came from 3 decades of managing the family's most sensitive affairs. The entirety of the De Luca estate, including all legitimate business holdings valued at approximately $340 million, all real estate properties in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Miami, all offshore accounts totaling an additional $160 million, all shell corporations, and all additional assets are bequeathed in their entirety to a single beneficiary. "Who?" Gabriella shrieked, her face turning a dangerous shade of red, her carefully applied makeup beginning to run with furious tears. "Who is she? Is it some mistress? Did he have a bastard child somewhere? Some whore he kept hidden in Queens?" Leonardo looked up from the document, staring directly at the hidden security camera. Vincenzo had insisted he install in the corner molding specifically for this moment. knowing he would have wanted to witness this revelation even from whatever afterlife awaited him. The sole beneficiary is Miss Maria Elena Costello, Leonardo said with barely concealed satisfaction. And as of this reading, she is your landlord, your employer if you wish to remain associated with any family business, and the absolute head of this organization. Who the hell is Maria Costello? Antonio roared, standing and slamming both hands on the antique table hard enough to rattle the crystal water glasses. I've never heard that name in my entire life. She's not family. She's not even Italian, for God's sake. She is a waitress at the Starlight Diner on 4th Avenue, Leonardo said, closing the portfolio with a heavy final thud that sounded like a coffin lid. And as of this moment, she owns everything your father built over 52 years. Everything. I suggest you both lower your voices immediately, because I am leaving right now to collect her and bring her here to take formal possession of her inheritance. Leonardo stood, gathering his materials with practiced efficiency. He looked at the security guards stationed at the library doors, men who had protected the De Luca family for years. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Antonio De Luca and Miss Gabriella De Luca from the premises immediately. The new owner will decide if and when they may return. They are no longer residents here. As the guards moved forward, large, intimidating men in black suits who had once protected Antonio and Gabriella but now served a new master, Gabriella began screaming incoherently. She grabbed an antique Venetian vase worth $50,000 from a side table and hurled it against the wall, where it exploded into countless glittering fragments. Antonio just stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, his entire world dissolving around him like salt in rain. He looked at the cousins, who were staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed schadenfreude. Leonardo walked past the chaos without another glance, past the weeping relatives who didn't know what this meant for their positions, past the confused catering staff who had stopped serving to watch the family implode. He walked to his Mercedes, where his driver waited. "Where to, Mr. Russo?" the driver asked. "The Starlight Diner on 4th Avenue, Leonardo said, settling into the leather seat and straightening his tie. "I have a life to change forever." The atmosphere inside the Starlight Diner had become toxic and oppressive. Frank stood over Maria, his considerable bulk casting a shadow, his face a mask of petty tyranny amplified by stress. "You're clumsy, you're distracted, and frankly, Maria, you're becoming bad for business," Frank spat, wiping sweat from his receding hairline with a dirty towel. "This is the third plate you've broken in 2 months. The cost is adding up. Clean up this mess, hand over your apron, and get out. You're fired, effective immediately. Don't even bother asking for a reference." Maria felt a cold, familiar numbness spread through her chest. This was rock bottom, the absolute end. Without this job, she couldn't even make a partial rent payment. Without the apartment, she and Sophia were literally on the street with nowhere to go. She opened her mouth to beg, to trade whatever remained of her dignity for one more week of minimum wage and abuse, when the bell above the door chimed with unusual weight. Leonardo Russo stepped into the diner. In a room of grease-stained floors and flickering fluorescent lights, he looked like an emissary from another world entirely. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost $12,000. His silver hair was perfectly groomed. He carried a leather briefcase with the gravity of a man carrying state secrets. Behind him, 2 large men in dark suits, former Special Forces, now De Luca family security, took positions by the door and quietly locked it, turning the sign to closed. The diner fell absolutely silent. Every conversation stopped, every fork was lowered. Frank's demeanor shifted instantly from bully to obsequious servant. "Can I help you, sir? I apologize for the mess. We're just handling a minor personnel issue. Our best booth is available if you'd like." Leonardo didn't acknowledge him. His eyes scanned the room until they found Maria kneeling on the floor. "I am looking for Miss Maria Elena Costello," Leonardo announced, his voice filling the small space with absolute authority. Tony blinked in confusion, looking between Leonardo and Maria. "Maria? She just got terminated. Personnel issue. If she owes you money or caused some problem, I can give you whatever information." "I am not here to collect a debt," Leonardo said, stepping around Frank as if he were an insignificant obstacle. He approached Maria and extended his hand. Miss Costello, please leave the broken dishware. That is no longer your concern. Maria looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Fear was her dominant emotion. Am I in trouble? Is this about the hospital bills? I'm paying them, I swear. I have a payment plan. I haven't missed one yet. Leonardo's expression softened slightly, a crack in his professional armor. You are not in any trouble, Maria. Please allow me to help you to your feet. He helped her stand, his grip firm but gentle. She wiped her hands on her stained apron, ashamed of the syrup and the general evidence of poverty. My name is Leonardo Russo. I am the executor of the estate of the late Vincenzo Salvatore De Luca. The name meant nothing to her initially. She had seen it on the news that morning but made no connection. I don't understand. I don't know who that is. Why would you be looking for me? You knew him as Vinny, Leonardo said gently. The gentleman with the army jacket who sat in booth 5 3 weeks ago, the one you gave soup to, the one whose $5 tip you returned because you didn't want his feet to be cold. Maria gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes widening with sudden recognition and grief. Vinny? Oh my God, that was him? The man on the news? He died? Frank snorted derisively. That homeless guy? You're a lawyer for a homeless bum? Sir, I think there's been a mistake. Leonardo turned his head slowly, fixing Frank with a look that had made federal prosecutors reconsider their careers. Mr. De Luca was the head of the De Luca crime family and controlled business interests worth over $500 million. And I suggest you remain completely silent, or I will have this establishment condemned for health violations before your lunch rush begins. I have inspectors who owe me considerable favors. Frank turned pale and backed away, suddenly very interested in something in the kitchen. Leonardo turned back to Maria. Yes, Maria. Vincenzo passed away 3 weeks ago from pancreatic cancer. He spoke of you until his final breath. He wanted you to know that the socks you told him to buy, he purchased them the very next morning. Navy blue wool socks. He said they were wonderfully warm. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks. He was such a sweet man. I kept hoping he'd come back. I saved a scarf for him. He didn't need the scarf, Leonardo said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. But he needed to know that someone cared enough to save it. He tested many people, Maria. His own children, business associates, politicians he owned. Everyone saw a beggar. You alone saw a human being deserving of dignity. Leonardo placed his briefcase on the nearest table and opened it. Vincenzo left a last will and testament. The assets were transferred immediately upon the reading, which concluded 40 minutes ago. Assets? Maria asked, confused. Did he leave me something? A keepsake? He left you everything, Leonardo said simply. He pulled out an official document. Effective immediately, you are the sole owner of the De Luca estate. This includes the family mansion in Bay Ridge, a penthouse in Manhattan, a beach house in Miami, and controlling interest in 23 legitimate business entities. Maria stared at him. The words made no sense. I don't understand. I'm a waitress. I'm about to be homeless. I have $42 in my account. Maria, Leonardo said, looking her directly in the eye. He left you an estate valued at approximately $500 million. You are now one of the wealthiest women in New York. The sound seemed to drain from the diner. Tommy dropped his coffee mug. Frank made a choking sound. 500. Maria couldn't finish. She grabbed the table. Million? That's not possible. I'm nobody. I can't run businesses. I have a daughter I don't know anything about. Your daughter will never worry about medication again, Leonardo said firmly. Vincenzo anticipated your concerns. He asked me to guide you, to be your counsel and protection until you're ready. But right now, you need to come with me. Once the press discovers this, you'll be swarmed. You need security. Maria looked around the diner. The scuffed floor, the worn counters, her entire life of struggle. She looked at Frank, now staring at her with terror and greed. Maria, sweetheart? Frank stammered, sweating. I was joking about firing you. We're family here. I always knew you were special. Maybe I could help manage your estate? I've got experience. Maria straightened her spine. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of poverty lifted. She removed her apron, folded it precisely, and placed it on the table. Frank, she said quietly but with steel in her voice, the soup was $4.50. The coffee was $2. That's $6.50 I paid for a customer you tried to throw out. I expect that in my final check, along with the $120 in tips you accidentally kept last month. She turned to Leonardo. Take me to Sofia, then take me to Vincenzo's home. Of course, Miss Costello, Leonardo said with a slight smile. As they walked out, Frank ran after them. Maria, wait, who's going to cover your shift? You can't just... Maria paused at the Mercedes door. I don't know, Frank, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always said I was replaceable. She slid into the car. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, shutting out the cold, the fear, and the life she was leaving behind forever.